The story begins inside the online game Warlord, deep within the in-game Walberry Forest. A fierce battle has just ended. One of the players, gravely wounded, is kneeling in the center of the forest, completely surrounded by enemies. The bodies of his fallen comrades lie scattered around him. Weakly, one of the men reports to his commander that despite everything, that man never showed up. He asks what they should do next. The woman in command coldly surveys the wounded warrior. Without hesitation, she orders the executioner to finish him. The executioner charges forward, blade raised, intent on delivering the final blow. The wounded player closes his eyes and braces himself for death. At that very moment, a figure bursts out of nowhere and intercepts the executioner's strike. The sudden clash echoes through the forest. When the surrounding soldiers see who it is, their expressions change instantly. It is Jason. Some of them visibly relax. However, one soldier suddenly recognizes him and shouts his true in-game name, Hyrcanus. He orders everyone to seize him. Hyrcanus hears the command and immediately launches into action. Moving with lightning speed, he attacks first. He shows no mercy, cutting down every soldier who intended to kill him. Within moments, the forest falls silent as the last of the attackers collapses. Looking at the defeated enemies, Hyrcanus scoffs and asks if they truly believed that attacking him as a group would be enough. They were never a match for him. His real name is Jason, a member of the Mask of Haho Guild, feared throughout the game under the nickname Hero Killer. His surviving companions rush toward him, apologizing profusely. They admit the ambush was their fault. They failed to realize the enemy had been waiting. Hyrcanus calmly sheathes his sword, signaling that apologies are unnecessary. He reaches out a hand, helps them up, and assures them that he is fine. The group is deeply moved that he saved them once again. Hyrcanus, however, shakes his head and tells them the blame does not lie with them. He turns his gaze toward the woman seated arrogantly on a throne nearby and declares that she is the one at fault, a pathetic loser who lacks the skill to fight herself. The woman smiles mysteriously. Rising from her throne, she comments that their friendship is touching, though painfully sentimental. She declares that even if such weaklings unite, it will change nothing. Her name is Siri, real name Chelsea, a core member of the Thunder Hunters Guild, known across Warlord as the Thunder Queen. Hyrcanus laughs openly. He points out how amusing her words sound, especially considering that these very non-entities had once defeated her. Siri warns him to watch his mouth, threatening to make him regret his arrogance. In response, Hyrcanus calmly takes out a device and asks if she truly intends to make him regret anything. He activates his inventory, equips his gear, and his appearance changes completely as his full combat form manifests. Pointing his sword directly at her, he declares that regret is reserved for the weak, people like her. Enraged, Siri curses him and orders her men to destroy him. Hyrcanus laughs again, doubting they have learned anything at all. Suddenly, a sharp pain erupts in his body. A blade has pierced through him. He turns around in disbelief and realizes the strike did not come from the enemy, but from his own companions. The system instantly issues warnings. His health is rapidly dropping, and his movement is restricted. One of his so-called friends explains shakily that they had no choice. They needed money. He asks Hyrcanus not to hate them. Hyrcanus cannot believe what is happening. Siri bursts into laughter, mocking him mercilessly. She calls him a naive fool for believing in friendship in a world ruled by money. Stepping closer, she declares that she will personally erase him from the game. Worse still, she plans to kill him every time he logs in, preventing him from ever progressing. She adds cruelly that while Hyrcanus was fully immersed in Warlord, in real life he was nothing, a nobody. And now, after all his effort, he has returned to being trash. Driven mad by rage, Hyrcanus digs his fingers into the ground and screams at her to shut her filthy mouth. He lunges forward, but once again his own comrades stop him, driving their swords into his body. Watching this, Siri calmly thanks them. With his remaining strength, Hyrcanus asks why they did this. The guild had meant everything to him. One of the traitors, overcome with guilt, tells him to just die and confesses that they were paid several billion for his elimination. Despite this, the pain that consumes Hyrcanus is not physical, it is disappointment. These were the people who had sworn they were family. Now, staring at their greedy faces, he understands that it was all an illusion. Soon, the system announces his character's death and imposes a 48-hour ban. Jason awakens in the real world, screaming in horror. Everything he built is gone. Warlord had become a global phenomenon, generating unimaginable profits through advanced AI. For Jason, it was more than a game, it was the only thing he was ever good at. In real life, people always treated him like trash. He recalls how he once met a friend who later betrayed him. That day, the man seemed kind and even suggested creating a guild together. Remembering it now fills Jason with uncontrollable fury. He throws on his shirt, slips into his slippers, and runs into the street, his thirst for revenge burning inside him. He calls Donald, asking if he understands what he has been through. Lost in thought, Jason runs without noticing the red traffic light. A garbage truck barrels toward him at full speed. Jason is too consumed by regret, thinking that if he had known how things would end, he would never have cared for anyone. He never sees the truck coming. The impact throws him violently onto the asphalt. Lying in a pool of blood, he hears the automated voice informing him that the number he dialed is unavailable. His final bitter thought is that of all possible endings, he was killed by a garbage truck. Faces flash before his eyes, his betrayer, and Siri, the one who erased him from the game. In his final moment, Jason swears to take revenge at any cost. Suddenly, something strange happens. A system message appears, announcing a connection in progress and user identification underway. Jason opens his eyes. A system greeting floats before him. Shock floods his mind as he sees a massive monster standing nearby, and a quest requiring basic training. Before he can process what is happening, someone calls him a noob. Looking ahead, he sees two players yelling at him to stop spacing out. They urgently need to defeat the Minotaur. The beast roars deafeningly. One of them shouts that it is impossible to clear this alone. At least 3 players are required. Hyrcanus asks calmly whether this is the tutorial Minotaur that was removed from the game 5 years ago for being too difficult. The others stare at him in confusion, replying that Warlord was released only 10 months ago. The words leave Hyrcanus stunned. Quickly composing himself, he pretends to understand. He lowers his stance, tightens his grip on his sword, and walks straight toward the Minotaur. The others shout after him, asking where he is going, but he ignores them. He charges. The Minotaur swings with terrifying force. Hyrcanus dodges at the last second, accelerates, and delivers a devastating strike that slices the monster apart. The Minotaur collapses into pieces. The players freeze, unable to believe what they have just witnessed. Then sly smiles spread across their faces. One of them approaches Hyrcanus, praises his strength, and invites him to join their guild. For Hyrcanus, the offer reopens old wounds, the same way his first betrayal began. Rage surges through him. He declares that he has made a decision. When they laugh and ask what he means, his sword answers. He mercilessly cuts them down and swears that if he ever trusts anyone again in this new life, he would consider himself a dog. Jason then awakens once more, this time truly in reality. He finds himself inside a massive V-Gear store, surrounded by people. He remembers that 5 years ago, he could not afford his own VR device and had only used a demo headset. The realization terrifies him. He has gone back in time. Throwing the helmet aside, Jason decides there is no time to waste. He sprints out of the store, his mind racing with future knowledge and the skills he has already mastered. This meant that, if used correctly, he now had a chance to avenge his death. Without hesitation, Jason pulled out his credit card and asked the saleswoman to sell him a V-Gear device. The girl looked surprised for a moment, but then nodded and began processing the purchase. Jason felt a brief sense of relief and immediately started thinking about where he would begin his new journey. However, that relief did not last long. A moment later, the saleswoman called out to him with an embarrassed expression and informed him that there were insufficient funds on the card. Jason froze, his mind going blank. Then he lowered his gaze and bitterly realized that it made perfect sense. If he truly had money, he would never have been using a demo headset in the first place. Panic gripped him. For a brief moment, he considered earning money first, but immediately rejected the idea. There was no time. Not anymore. Just then, a familiar voice pulled him out of his thoughts. The massive screen inside the store suddenly lit up, revealing Chelsea, better known to the world of Warlord as the Thunder Queen, Saray. On screen, she declared that the strong were never afraid of trials, that hesitation was a luxury unavailable on the battlefield. Saray urged players to rise, to become true masters of war. Jason stared at the advertisement in horror. The woman smiling confidently before him was the same one who had taken everything from him. He remembered her mocking laughter, the way she had called him trash. Rage surged through his chest. Turning away sharply, Jason clenched his fists. He could no longer afford to be distracted by her. Not now. By that evening, the V-Gear device had already been installed in his home. The technician calmly reported that the setup was complete and the system was ready for use. Jason thanked him and glanced down at the business card in his hand. He had only been able to buy the device by borrowing money. His thoughts drifted back to the moneylender. Jason had asked for 10 million won, and the man had agreed without hesitation. But then, without warning, the moneylender had forced Jason's hand onto the table, pulled out a knife, and slammed the blade down between his fingers with a chilling expression. The message had been clear. If the debt was not repaid, Jason's life would become hell. At the time, Jason had replied hesitantly that he would manage, that he would pay everything back. Now, looking back on it, he no longer cared. He was prepared to crawl through hell itself if that was what it took to reach his goal. To destroy the traitors. With all preparations complete, Jason stood before the device and loudly issued the launch command. The system responded instantly. User identification in progress. It felt as though a long time had passed since Hyrcanus had last been here. He knew that someone was supposed to appear soon. A girl, but her name refused to come to mind. As if responding to his thoughts, an entity in the form of a young girl materialized before him. She congratulated him on completing his training and introduced herself as Ariadne. She explained that she was here to assist with his class selection. Using her powers, Ariadne explained the rules of class progression. First, one had to choose a base class. The skills obtained at this stage would determine all future development. She began describing the available options. The warrior was a close combat class, ideal for players who enjoyed fast-paced, dynamic battles. Hyrcanus was momentarily interested, but quickly dismissed the idea. He understood too well that in solo play, warriors faced overwhelming difficulties. Next, Ariadne introduced the cleric, a support-oriented class capable of healing and strengthening allies through magic. Hyrcanus rejected it without hesitation, stating that he had no intention of wasting his time helping others. Only one option remained. Ariadne smiled faintly and remarked that all that was left was to hope the game would be entertaining enough for him. The system immediately announced that the base class had been selected and that the player would be transported to the corresponding class tower. When Hyrcanus arrived, he found himself inside a vast chamber. An old man was seated atop an enormous floating book. He greeted Hyrcanus warmly as a young seeker of knowledge and introduced himself as Golko, explaining that he would serve as his guide along the path of magic. Golko then asked what kind of magic Hyrcanus wished to study. Hyrcanus replied calmly that he wanted to master dark magic. Silence filled the room. The old man hesitated before asking if Hyrcanus had meant earth magic. Hyrcanus clarified that he was speaking specifically about dark magic. Golko's expression changed completely. Shocked, he asked how Hyrcanus even knew of such an art. Dark magic, he warned, devoured the soul of its user. Hyrcanus answered without hesitation. He said he understood the risks and was prepared to stake everything. Golko began to tremble. After a moment, he nodded and said it was time to begin. His appearance suddenly shifted. In an instant, the kindly old man transformed into a living skeleton. Laughing loudly, Golko admitted that it had been a long time since he had seen a young man willing to walk such a path. He summoned a book of dark magic before Hyrcanus and instructed him to place his hand upon it, issuing one final warning that this road was far too treacherous for the faint of heart. Hyrcanus did not hesitate. He placed his hand on the book and declared that his heart was anything but weak. Black energy surged around him. Golko laughed again as he felt power flooding into Hyrcanus's body, remarking that at last, someone truly interesting had appeared. At that moment, Hyrcanus recalled a legendary video from his past life, footage of a necromancer single-handedly defeating a raid boss. He realized that this was the power he needed. The system announced that Hyrcanus had become a necromancer and had obtained a skeletal fragment. Inspired, Hyrcanus immediately decided to test his new skill. He threw the skull, shrouded in dark energy, onto the ground. The system notified him that a skeletal warrior infused with his magic was forming. He watched as the creature took shape and rose before him. This time he thought he would truly become a necromancer. Turning away, Hyrcanus noted that it was time to level up. The training dungeon should be nearby. But when he glanced back, he noticed that the skeleton's head had fallen off. Master and servant stood there, staring at each other in silence. A portal soon opened, and the system announced that Hyrcanus had entered the beginner training dungeon. His mood, however, darkened as he remembered how easily his skeleton had fallen apart. In his previous life, such summons had been far more reliable. He opened the stats window and examined the description of the skeletal fragment skill. Wondering if he had overused mana, Hyrcanus concluded that he urgently needed levels. A sudden noise made him turn sharply. A pack of coal wolves was approaching. Hyrcanus smiled. These monsters were not especially strong, but their speed made them ideal for testing skills. He activated Skeletal Fragment and ordered his summon to attack. The skeleton appeared instantly. The system announced that it had detected enemies and assumed a combat stance. Turning toward the wolves, the skeleton let out a loud, unsettling roar. The wolves hesitated, but only briefly. Hyrcanus mentally commanded his servant to destroy them. The skeleton charged. First, everything looked promising. Hyrcanus even thought that at this rate, he would reach the maximum level quickly. Then the wolves struck. After a single blow, the skeleton was torn apart. The summoning skull rolled to Hyrcanus's feet. Genuine despair filled him. Anger and confusion surged together. He reopened the system interface, demanding to see the skill details. After rereading the description, he realized he had forgotten to set the operating mode. He switched the skeleton to defense mode. The result was the same. He tried special action mode. The skeleton began dancing. Hyrcanus nearly cried. Admitting defeat, he attempted to delete his character, only for the system to inform him that new accounts could not be deleted for 3 months. He realized he was trapped. He could not delete his character, could not change his class, and loan payments would begin in a month. Why, he wondered, did everything fall apart just as he thought he was moving forward? Looking at his useless skeleton, Hyrcanus begged it to at least stand still. Then suddenly realization struck. He remembered the legendary Necromancer again. Opening the stats window, he noticed something crucial: skills improved through combat. During the fight with the coal wolves, the skeleton had been watching him, studying his movements. A slow smile formed on Hyrcanus's face. He threw a club to his servant and told it that it was lucky to serve him. After all, he had once been called a genius. But in battle, there was only one rule. With those words, Hyrcanus lunged forward and delivered a crushing blow, declaring that if the skeleton did not dodge, it would die. The skeleton was sent flying into the stone wall. Hyrcanus ordered it to stand. Again and again he struck. Again and again the skeleton was hurled across the dungeon. He shouted at it to stop standing around like an idiot, to learn to dodge and counterattack when the chance arose. The skeleton wiped its face and prepared once more. This time the enemy was the coal wolves again. The skeleton dodged their attack, countered with a strike to the jaw, and finished with a powerful spinning kick. The wolves fell one by one. After the battle, the skeleton turned toward its master. Hyrcanus scolded it for losing focus, but inwardly admitted that the final blow had been impressive. The system announced that proficiency in Bone Shard had increased by several levels. Both master and servant leveled up. Some time later, Hyrcanus arrived at the starting village, Figa's castle. He observed that his student was learning quickly. With a few more days of training, the skeleton would be able to handle dungeons on its own. Now was the decisive moment. First, he needed to reach level 10. Suddenly, someone called out to him. A plump man stepped forward and demanded to know whether Hyrcanus understood that it was customary to apologize after colliding with someone. Hyrcanus ignored him. He had no time for nonsense. The fat man swung his fist in anger. Before it could land, a stranger appeared and intercepted the blow. The man calmly stated that people should not attack others with their fists. Though displeased, the fat man quickly backed down, assuming the stranger was an ally. Hyrcanus felt a chill run through him as he took in the stranger's clothes and powerful build. A name surfaced in his mind. His name was Matador Cheb. Hyrcanus recognized it instantly, a legendary warrior from his past life. Cold sweat broke out across Hyrcanus's back. Before he could stop himself, he shouted for the man to wait. However, the fat man paid no attention. Instead, he spat on the ground beside the legendary warrior and scoffed. He said Cheb should mind his own business if he did not understand the situation. After all, it was Hyrcanus who had collided with him and failed to apologize. With a sneer, the fat man added that Cheb had clearly never heard the saying, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. First, Cheb did not respond. Then, in the next instant, a terrifying aura erupted from his body. Hyrcanus felt it crash over him like a tidal wave. The sheer pressure left him stunned. Cheb's relaxed smile twisted into something chilling. Calmly, Cheb remarked that since the man had already struck him on the palm, perhaps he should return the gesture. The fat man's companion suddenly screamed in panic, shouting that the man standing before them was Matador Cheb himself, the leader of the Red Bulls Guild, one of the 30 strongest players, a battle-crazed madman known as a killer. The fat man turned pale and demanded to know why someone like that would even be in this place. Cheb answered by grabbing him firmly by the shoulder and telling him that he wanted to hear the answer directly from him. The fat man slowly turned around, his face completely twisted with fear. A second later, he bolted, fleeing together with his companion while screaming apologies over his shoulder. Cheb burst into loud laughter and remarked cheerfully that he was glad everything had been resolved peacefully. He patted Hyrcanus on the shoulder and asked if he was all right, advising him not to bother with people like that. Suddenly, Hyrcanus brushed his hand away. In a cold voice, he stated that next time, he would not need anyone's help. Cheb was left standing there, confused, unable to understand what had just happened. He watched Hyrcanus leave, thinking that the young man seemed unexpectedly distant. Walking away at a brisk pace, Hyrcanus's thoughts churned darkly. For a brief moment, he had been completely overwhelmed by Cheb's power. His teeth clenched. Blazing with rage, he silently swore that the next time they met, he would no longer be the same person he was now. Later, after entering a dungeon, the encounter still weighed heavily on his mind. He clearly understood the gap in strength between them. Cheb and Saray were roughly on the same level. That meant only one thing. If he wanted revenge, he would have to reach that level of power himself. As the thought settled, a massive black tiger suddenly lunged at him from the shadows. Before Hyrcanus could react, his skeleton warrior leapt forward, placing itself between the beast and its master. In a single decisive motion, it crushed the tiger to the ground and destroyed it instantly. The system notified that the skeleton had slain the black tiger and received a level increase. Hyrcanus paused in surprise, wondering if it had really taken him 3 full days just to reach level 10. It was far longer than he had expected. His servant seemed visibly upset, but after a short delay the system finally congratulated the master as well. Hyrcanus had officially reached level 10. The system reported several changes at once. Monsters would no longer spawn in the training dungeon, the newbie mark had been removed, and the accumulated rewards were ready for distribution. Hyrcanus instinctively glanced at his wristwatch, the multifunctional device responsible for stats, missions, maps, inventory, and messages. He realized he had barely used it lately and immediately opened the character window. Looking over his attributes, he frowned. The numbers were unimpressive. The system prompted him to distribute his free points. Hyrcanus hesitated. This was his very first allocation. There would be no second chance to correct a mistake. For a necromancer, increasing intellect or magic would have been the obvious choice. Yet, contrary to all logic, he placed every single point into strength. In an instant, the strength stat surged by 50 points, jumping to a total of 53. The skeleton, silently observing, slumped in visible disappointment. Noticing this, Hyrcanus asked what was wrong. He calmly explained that he had no intention of abandoning necromancy. This decision was made entirely for the sake of training his conscript. Increasing intellect or magic would not bring immediate, tangible results. Strength, however, would allow him to personally teach the skeleton every combat technique he had refined in his past life. He openly admitted that he was staking his life on the skeleton's growth, trusting it to absorb everything he taught. He ordered his servant not to hold back and to focus entirely on training while he handled everything else. Hyrcanus also mentioned that there were ways to compensate for missing attributes. The very next day, he headed to the Raiders Association branch located within Phygus Castle. There, the task distributor raised an item and loudly announced the arrival of new missions. Instantly, a crowd of players surged forward. Hyrcanus observed that even during this slow season, people still rushed toward quests. When it was finally his turn at the counter, he requested to see the remaining missions. The elderly clerk agreed but warned him that only overly difficult tasks or low-reward assignments were left. As Hyrcanus skimmed the list, most of the missions struck him as painfully dull. Then one entry caught his eye. The moment he selected it, he knew it would be his trump card. The mission required exploring a cave on Mount Bima. It was a standard assignment filled with low-level monsters and offered a meager reward of 10 gold coins. The old man frowned and asked if he was certain about his choice. Hyrcanus replied calmly, fully aware that the mission itself was unremarkable. What mattered was the condition attached to it. If completed upon reaching level 15, the player would earn the title Promising. Many dismissed titles as meaningless, but Hyrcanus knew better. Titles directly enhanced a character's stats. A low-level player with average attributes could experience a dramatic boost simply by acquiring one. This quest marked the true beginning of his career. Leaving the guild, Hyrcanus decided it was time to prepare. Sometime later, he arrived at Mount Bima, only to grimace in frustration. His appearance was absurd. He silently cursed himself, wondering how he had managed to look so ridiculous. The reason was simple. He had spent nearly all his money equipping the skeleton, leaving himself with only cheap, laughable clothing. Still, he decided it would suffice. He would finish the mission quickly and buy proper gear afterward. Without wasting another second, Hyrcanus plunged into the forest. Elsewhere among the trees, a blood-soaked hand suddenly emerged from a bush. A wounded man cried out for help before being violently dragged back inside. 3 players laughed quietly as they listened to his screams fade away. Not long after, a warrior arrived at Mount Bima and loudly declared that the great adventure of Mighty Multi was about to begin. Having reached level 11, he was confident that he might soon become a top player. Suddenly, he heard a desperate plea for help. Someone was begging for assistance in rescuing a missing companion. He rushed toward the sound. A priest explained that their party had been ambushed by a monster that appeared without warning. They had barely survived and were now completely out of healing potions. The warrior checked his device and said he might have a few to spare. The priest burst into grateful tears. It was a lie. While the warrior was distracted, another man struck him from behind. Weakening rapidly from blood loss, the warrior collapsed, utterly confused. The priest leaned over him, thanked him once more, and coldly stated that his belongings would now be put to good use. Realizing he had been deceived by such despicable people, the warrior burned with rage. The priest drove a blade into his body and calmly remarked that it was his own fault for falling for such an obvious trick. The system announced that player Multi had been eliminated and removed from the game. His watch was reset and transferred to his killers. They were members of the Ralph family, a notorious gang of gambler assassins. After waiting several hours, the priest cast a chilling look at his companions and ordered them to search for the next victim. Meanwhile, in another part of the forest, the skeleton prepared to engage a pack of wolves. The monsters lunged without hesitation. Hyrcanus snapped his fingers, switching his servant into attack mode. The skeleton surged forward and effortlessly tore through the pack. The system announced that the skeleton warrior had slain an ancient wolf and gained 375 experience points, followed by 366 and 379 from the remaining beasts. Watching the battle, Hyrcanus noted that equipping the skeleton with a sword had transformed it into a force capable of wiping out entire packs alone. He felt reassured. Prioritizing his subordinates' equipment had been the right decision. Real players valued performance over appearance. The skeleton glanced back, catching its master's proud look, but Hyrcanus waved it off. He stated that if the wolves were finished, it was time to move on. He needed to level up and get rid of this ridiculous outfit. The skeleton immediately followed. Suddenly, an arrow whistled through the air and pierced straight through the skeleton's skull. Hyrcanus froze, instinctively searching for the source. A man rushed forward, apologizing profusely. It was the same group of deceivers. The priest claimed he had mistaken the skeleton for a monster and begged forgiveness. Hyrcanus was about to let it go, until he noticed the blood-stained watch on the priest's wrist and the sword belonging to the slain warrior. Instantly, he understood who they were. Concealing his realization, he pretended to believe them. Smiling, he said it was fine and asked whether they had a mana potion. The priest replied that they did not, but offered to help him level up instead, explaining that mana would be restored upon leveling. Hyrcanus agreed, maintaining his act. Claiming responsibility for the accident, the priest pointed toward nearby monsters and called his group forward. As they moved, he quietly confirmed the plan with his accomplices. The warrior would draw the monster's aggression first, the mage would apply a buff, and then they would accidentally release it onto Hyrcanus, expecting him to panic. Their plan collapsed instantly. The skeleton dispatched the monster with ease. Hyrcanus calmly stated that everything was fine and suggested continuing. Unease crept into the players' minds. They questioned what kind of creature he controlled, and whether his level was far higher than it appeared. Adjusting their strategy, they released multiple waves of monsters at once. While Hyrcanus was supposedly distracted, the warrior circled behind him, confident of victory. He raised his mace and struck. Hyrcanus dodged effortlessly. The counterattack was immediate. The warrior was crushed by a devastating blow. The priest screamed in panic, unable to comprehend what was happening. Hyrcanus snapped his fingers. The skeleton answered instantly, its eye sockets igniting with a cold blue glow. Without hesitation, he charged forward alongside his master, launching a decisive attack on the bandits. They screamed in terror, crying out for him to stop, begging for mercy. But they no longer had even the slightest chance to defend themselves. A perfectly coordinated assault from Hyrcanus and his skeleton crashed down upon them, and one by one, their bodies collapsed to the ground. Approaching the fallen enemies, Hyrcanus made it clear that he knew people like them all too well. He reflected grimly that such types gained trust only to betray it at the right moment and steal everything they could. He admitted that if he still thought the way he once had, he himself might have fallen for such a crude and primitive trick. The priest wailed in despair, pleading for Hyrcanus to wait and offering up everything he had in exchange for his life. But Hyrcanus no longer trusted anyone. Calmly, he made it clear that it was already too late, and without mercy, he finished the enemy off. At that moment, the system announced that the player Ralph had been eliminated. It also reported that the 8 watches he had been carrying had dropped to the ground. When Hyrcanus saw how many watches Ralph possessed, a surge of anger rose within him. This scoundrel was completely insane. Still, the trophies offered tremendous benefits. First and foremost, Hyrcanus decided that he would finally buy himself proper clothes. Turning around, he noticed his skeleton casually kicking the already defeated warrior. Hyrcanus addressed his companion and suggested that they gather the loot scattered nearby. Then he extended his hand and began healing the wound left by the arrow that had pierced the skeleton's skull. In only a short time, the skeleton was fully restored. With a small smile, Hyrcanus remarked that his companion looked genuinely pleased. He added thoughtfully that appearance meant nothing in the game. True beauty was revealed only from within. As he struck an awkward pose while saying this, the skeleton stared at him in silent confusion. Meanwhile, Hyrcanus noted that the watch dropped by the priest was a true jackpot. He knew the odds of obtaining rare items from another player's watch were less than 1%, yet luck had clearly favored him. Among the trophies was also an enormous amount of gold. Lifting a mask from the fallen inventory, he thought that thanks to these fools, everything was progressing far faster than he had expected. He decided that he would soon begin recording his gaming adventures, and for that, he would need a distinct style. But as that thought crossed his mind, something unpleasant suddenly resurfaced in his memory. He remembered how, in his past life, he had once suggested to his friend that everyone in the guild wear traditional ha-ho masks. Back then, he had been overflowing with enthusiasm, even proposing that the very next day they rename the guild to Ha-Ho Mask. The memory darkened his mood instantly. For a brief moment, he even considered abandoning his current style altogether. Hyrcanus clenched his teeth and swore that he would never again allow anyone to take what rightfully belonged to him. Filled with smoldering rage, he firmly declared to himself that he would prove he was right, and that this moment marked the beginning of his new story. Placing the sinister mask over his face, he leapt forward and called for the skeleton to follow. Before long, the two arrived at another dungeon. They stepped through the portal together, and the system announced that Hyrcanus had entered the cave dungeon of Mount Bhima. The hero carefully examined the markings carved into the stone walls, and immediately recalled that blue werewolves were known to inhabit this place. He knew all too well that these monsters were dangerous. Still, with his newly acquired equipment, he believed he could clear the dungeon in no more than 10 minutes. Confidently, he ordered his companion to move ahead. However, several hours later, Hyrcanus found himself in complete despair. Not a single monster had appeared. He could not understand what was happening. If the dungeon had already been cleared, the system would have issued a notification. Then he noticed something strange etched into the stone. In the next instant, an overwhelming surge of dark energy erupted from the wall. The system immediately notified him that he had discovered an instance dungeon and asked whether he wished to enter. Hyrcanus collapsed onto the ground in shock, finally understanding why no monsters had appeared. Instance dungeons could randomly spawn within regular dungeons, and until they were cleared, the surrounding area would remain sealed. He knew very well that instance dungeons were far more difficult, but in return they offered double the rewards. Once inside, there was no leaving until the objective was completed or death claimed the player. Rising to his feet, Hyrcanus considered turning back. Dying here would lock him out of the game for 2 entire days, and farming simpler quests would have been far safer. But he understood that this was different. When the system confirmed entry, Hyrcanus stepped into the portal, telling himself that everything would be fine, at least until he died. A blinding light engulfed him. When his vision cleared, he found himself standing in a place that resembled a coliseum, suffused with an oppressive atmosphere. Suddenly, a massive impact shook the ground. In the next moment, a gigantic and sinister werewolf appeared before him, an infected werewolf of unknown level. The creature did not hesitate for even a second and immediately charged. Still struggling to grasp what was happening, Hyrcanus failed to defend himself and was violently slammed into the wall. Seeing his master in danger, the skeleton flew into a rage and instantly took a combat stance. Hyrcanus, however, burst out laughing, calling his luck insane. A corrupted monster stood before him. Surely this had to be part of a main quest. He called out to his companion, making it clear that if they failed to defeat the werewolf, they could forget about dinner. With that thought, Hyrcanus rushed forward. The skeleton drew his sword and prepared to follow, then abruptly drove the blade into the ground, offering it as support. Using it as leverage, Hyrcanus kicked off and launched himself straight at the infected werewolf. The beast released a deafening howl. Midair, Hyrcanus activated Curse Remove. His blade instantly filled with demonic energy. The werewolf froze in confusion, staring at him in horror, and in the next instant, one of its arms was severed. The monster screamed in agony as the system announced that the skill had successfully activated and the target stats had been reduced by 10%. As the beast writhed, Hyrcanus glanced at his sword, noting that for a first attempt, the result was more than satisfactory. But the werewolf, now bathed in a blood-red aura and completely maddened, lunged at him once more. A warning message appeared, stating that the werewolf had entered a berserk state and all applied effects had been cancelled. Hyrcanus steadied himself, mentally acknowledging that this was exactly what one should expect from a dungeon boss. Then he smiled, deciding it was time to reveal something he had been saving. He opened his inventory and unleashed a torrent of dark energy. It enveloped his body completely before exploding outward in a violent flash. When the light faded, Hyrcanus emerged clad in battle armor, laughing as he asked where they had left off. This was slot activation, an ability unique to warlords. When activated, the slot forced energy through the player's body, enhancing their attributes and altering their appearance. The resulting form was always unpredictable, different for every user, earning it the nickname Ultimate Ability among players. Hyrcanus gestured toward the infected werewolf, daring it to come. The monster roared and charged, but Hyrcanus dodged its attacks with ease. After several maneuvers, he leapt back to create distance. The beast attacked again with terrifying force, and Hyrcanus noted grimly that this opponent was unquestionably a boss. Its speed and strength made that much clear. As the werewolf continued its reckless assault, leaving momentary openings, Hyrcanus spotted one. His energy-wreathed sword came down in a devastating strike, drawing another agonized scream from the monster. Hyrcanus smiled. Moments like this were what made the game truly thrilling. Then the ground trembled again. The werewolf was still alive and attacked once more. Hyrcanus sighed, reminding himself that relaxing against a berserk enemy was dangerous. As the beast slashed wildly, he merely smiled and glanced to the side, wondering if his skeleton had forgotten something. In the next instant, the skeleton leapt onto the werewolf, delivering a crushing blow and severing its remaining arm. Hyrcanus ordered his servant to use the technique they had practiced together. The werewolf faltered, completely overwhelmed. The combined assault of master and servant descended upon it in a storm of blows so fast the creature had no time to react. In seconds, the monster was reduced to pieces. The system announced that the infected werewolf had been defeated. Hyrcanus deactivated slot activation and nodded in satisfaction. It had gone better than expected. The system confirmed the completion of the Bhima Mountain Cave mission and awarded 10 gold coins. It also announced that the skeleton warrior had defeated a high-level monster, upgrading the Bone Shard skill to rank E. While the skeleton celebrated its victory, Hyrcanus reflected that instance dungeons truly did offer superior rewards. Among the loot was the necklace of the infected ranger, a unique story item that increased all stats by 18. He was stunned by the find. While the necklace couldn't be sold, its value far surpassed standard equipment. His surprise deepened when the system granted him 3 titles at once: Promising Newcomer, Hero Aspirant, and Infected Ranger. Hyrcanus suspected this marked the introduction to the first chapter of the main storyline, the Infected Count. He knew better than anyone that main quests formed the backbone of Warlord's world, and their rewards were nothing short of colossal. They were the heart of the game itself. Trembling with excitement, he realized that even in his past life, he had barely reached the 4th chapter. This wasn't just luck, it was a true jackpot. Deciding not to push his fortune further, he logged out immediately. On the news, a player solemnly announced that the Hydra Guild had officially entered the final chapter of the Infected Count scenario and intended to complete it within 3 months. Jason stopped the broadcast, his heart sinking. What had moments ago felt like a jackpot suddenly seemed insignificant. Frustration boiled over, and he slammed his head against the table, realizing how far ahead the guild already was. For a moment, he wondered if his only option was to step aside and wait for the next chapter. Then a new thought struck him. Rushing back to the computer, Jason realized this might be his chance. The entire world was focused on the infected count scenario, and Warlord's first main storyline was nearing its end. Posting his video now could make all the difference. It could go viral. He knew he had done a good job recording everything. Now all that remained was editing and uploading it to Tube. And for that crucial task, there was only one person he trusted. A legendary figure from his past life surfaced in his memory. A girl, the renowned editor known as Romani. Seeing the request, she paused, wondering who this Hercules was supposed to be. As Romani reviewed the details, she couldn't help but scoff inwardly. What could a level 15 player possibly accomplish? She assumed it was nothing more than a beginner clearing an initial cave, likely some wealthy newbie recording content for social media. But then her eyes caught on a single detail. Her expression changed instantly. A certain name surfaced in her memory, and the realization filled her with genuine excitement. Romani was a freelance video editor, known in-game by the nickname Hellmouth, and she very rarely felt this intrigued by random requests. This one was different. The scene shifted to the city center, where towering skyscrapers pierced the sky. Inside one of them, a woman dressed in a sharp red suit sat watching the news on her tablet. Moments later, her subordinate entered the room and asked whether she had summoned him. She replied calmly that a new video related to the infected count scenario had just appeared. What caught her interest, she explained, was that the footage showed a level 15 player defeating an infected werewolf alone. The man responded that their team had already noticed the player, but monsters of that level were far too insignificant to warrant surveillance. The woman merely smiled, a slow, knowing smile, and said that she liked the video. After a brief pause, she issued a clear order. Bring the player from the recording to her. This woman was Chelsea, the head of Thunder Group Corporation, the largest business conglomerate in the world. Within Warlord, she was known as the Thunder Queen Syrah. The next day, Jason stared at his phone screen in disbelief. The video he had uploaded just yesterday had already surpassed 6,000 views. The number felt unreal, almost uncomfortable. In his past life, it had taken him months to achieve even a fraction of that attention. A message arrived from Romani, asking if he had seen the view count. Only then did Jason realize that something else had changed as well. She had messaged him first. That alone was unusual. Romani had a reputation for being distant, mysterious, and nearly impossible to reach. Yet not only had she initiated contact, she also asked when he planned to send her the next video. Jason leaned back, exhaling slowly. The truth was, he had no idea what to do next. He knew he wouldn't encounter another monster like that infected werewolf anytime soon. After some thought, he concluded that it would be smarter to resume recording only after reaching level 50. Still, despite his doubts, he powered up the VR device and began logging into the game. Whatever the risks, he understood one thing clearly. When opportunity knocks, you strike while the iron is hot. Cheb, known to many as the killer, replayed the video yet again. No matter how many times he watched it, the masked player's movements never lost their sharpness. Each strike was clean, efficient, almost instinctive. Yet the longer Cheb watched, the more a strange feeling crept over him. The posture, the timing, even the way the hero repositioned himself, it all felt vaguely familiar, as though he had seen this person somewhere before. At that moment, a girl approached him. It was Yel, a member of the Red Bulls Guild. Cheb mentioned that he was thinking about Herkin, the player wearing the Haho mask, currently one of the most discussed figures in the game. Yel shrugged and replied that if he had watched the same video dozens of times, it was only natural for it to start feeling familiar. A blond man nearby, overflowing with excitement, suddenly burst out with a loud comment. Yel immediately snapped, sharply telling him to shut up. She shoved him in the shoulder and added that if he was going to keep spouting nonsense, he should at least go inside already. There were only 5 minutes left before the broadcast. Cheb merely smiled slyly, gave her a wink, and said that he really liked her when she was angry. Yel crossed her arms, took a deep breath, and coldly replied that if he truly meant that, then he should prove himself during the stream. After all, more than 200,000 people had purchased tickets just to see him. Soon, Thunderous cheers echoed through the arena as the leader of the Red Bulls and the ninth-ranked warlord, Matador Chiba, appeared. When the broadcast began, all the guild members gathered before the dungeon portal. The countdown started, and Cheb stepped forward, leading his troops. Raising his blade, he ordered everyone to prepare for battle. Meanwhile, at the Figgis Castle Raiders Association, Hyrcanus stood with a deep frown on his face, scanning the quest list. Disappointment weighed heavily on him. There wasn't a single worthwhile mission available, though, given that this was still a beginner village, it wasn't entirely surprising. Still, the complete lack of decent quests irritated him. For a brief moment, he even considered taking a break from recording videos altogether. Just then, an elderly man approached him and cautiously addressed him as the adventurer who had cleared the Mount Bima cave. Hyrcanus recognized him immediately, Khotan, the man he had spoken to before. Khotan asked for a moment of his time and led him to a more secluded corner. There, the old man said that he had heard about what happened in the cave and knew that Hyrcanus had encountered a mutated creature. Hyrcanus frowned, confused. He didn't recall accepting any such quest and said that he had only fought a werewolf with strange eyes. Khotan chuckled quietly and replied that this was exactly what he suspected. The monster was most likely infected by a mysterious power. Hyrcanus listened skeptically, thinking the old man might simply be imagining things. Khotan continued, explaining that although the source of the infection was unknown, its influence caused monsters to lose control, leading to countless victims. For this reason, the association had issued rewards for those connected to these incidents. Before he could finish, Hyrcanus suddenly grabbed his hand and declared that he wanted to take part in the hunt. In his mind, this had to be a hidden quest, and there was no way he was going to miss it. Khotan tried to explain that it was still too early for such a challenge, but Hyrcanus firmly insisted, assuring him that he could handle it. Pressured, the old man finally relented and said that his decision would depend on how well the young adventurer performed. He mentioned that in Banzu Castle, east of Phygos, there was a man named Ahimbri. Khotan added that Ahimbri could guide him and promised to write a letter of recommendation. At once, a new quest appeared, the Teachings of Ahimbri. Objective: find Ahimbri and present Khotan's letter. Reward: skill book. Leaving the association, Hyrcanus struggled to contain his excitement. He could hardly believe what was happening. Becoming Ahimbri's apprentice was no small matter. Ahimbri was one of the 7 disciples of the great mage Bogan, a legendary figure sought by countless mages for rare skill books. This was an opportunity of immense value. Hyrcanus rushed forward, convinced that his titles and progress in the main quest had opened this path for him. If everything went well, he wouldn't need to worry about video content for a long time. Suddenly, he stopped. There was one important thing he had nearly forgotten. Turning toward the forest, he activated Bone Fragment and summoned his companion. As the skeleton appeared, Hyrcanus realized that he still hadn't checked the rewards from the previous battle. He decided to start with the werewolf skull he had kept. The system asked if he wished to use the skull to strengthen the skeleton warrior. He agreed immediately. The system announced that the skeleton had gained werewolf traits and received +2 stamina. Next, Hyrcanus equipped the necklace of the corrupted ranger without hesitation. The system confirmed activation, and all his stats increased by 18 points. He felt power surge through his body. Everything was finally falling into place. Then, he took out 2 more bone fragments and threw them to the ground. 2 additional skeleton warriors formed. The original skeletons stared at them in confusion. Hyrcanus explained that there were now 3 of them, and from this point forward, they would fight as one. He told them they had to get along. As they ventured deeper into the forest, Hyrcanus wondered what kind of monsters lived in the area. Meanwhile, the original skeleton quietly went berserk, clearly believing that it alone should be the master's disciple. They soon encountered a level 25 forest bear. The beast charged immediately, forcing Hyrcanus to dodge. Massive claws tore through the air, missing his head by mere centimeters. Then the bear roared and lunged again. Hyrcanus panicked, convinced he wouldn't evade in time, until he smiled, snapped his fingers, and realized the beast's attention was fully on him. One skeleton rushed in, but was swatted aside instantly, bones cracking on impact. Furious, Hyrcanus shouted that such a predictable attack would never work. He ordered another assault. The second skeleton charged and suffered the same fate. Hyrcanus exploded in rage, yelling that they were supposed to attack from the blind spot. When the third skeleton stepped forward awkwardly, Hyrcanus almost felt hopeful. But the bear casually swung again, tearing off the skeleton's head. That was the final straw. Hyrcanus finished the beast himself. Afterward, he questioned whether his summons possessed any intelligence at all. He ordered them to retrieve their heads and line up, then patiently explained how enemies always turn toward the source of an attack. He even drew a diagram on the ground. The skeletons stared back blankly. Defeated, Hyrcanus sighed and told them to forget everything. Still, there was progress. His skill rank had improved, and he could now summon 3 skeletons. But a major issue remained. They couldn't fight as a team. They simply mirrored one another, wasting mana and reducing overall efficiency. Hyrcanus decided not to overthink it for now. He had reached level 20, his original goal. Though combat videos were out of the question for the moment, he stood up, ordered the skeletons to follow, and announced that they would train on the road to Banzu Castle. It was clear now he couldn't stay on the sidelines. If he wanted power, he would have to fight himself. Sometime later, Hyrcanus arrived at the Raiders Association branch in Banzu Castle. Inside, players of all classes filled the hall. Moments later, a man stepped out from one of the inner rooms. The crowd immediately erupted, desperate to know what task Hyrcanus had received. They surged forward like a frenzied mob, attacking the hapless player in the center, tearing him apart both figuratively and literally. Observing the chaos, Hyrcanus shook his head. The players around him reminded him of a pack of hyenas, always eager to pounce, always waiting to profit from someone else's work. He pulled the mask over his face, thinking bitterly that such people existed everywhere, exploiting others without lifting a finger themselves. Suddenly, a voice called out. One player asked if Hyrcanus had received a worthwhile task and offered to complete it together. Hyrcanus didn't even bother answering. With a cold shrug, he dismissed the player and headed upstairs, determined to keep the Ahimbri quest a secret. Once upstairs, he presented the letter of recommendation from Khotan. The caretaker carefully examined the document, confirmed its authenticity, and politely directed him to the second floor. Meanwhile, the frantic crowd below tried desperately to follow, claiming they were part of Hyrcanus' group, but it was clear they had no idea what they were dealing with. Hyrcanus wondered what kind of reward Ahimbri would give. He was certain it would be special. After all, this was a hidden quest. More importantly, he hoped to establish a long-term connection with this NPC. Entering the designated room, he politely asked for permission, and what he saw inside left him stunned. The room was a mess. Books lay scattered across the floor, piles of parchment and scrolls were stacked haphazardly, and the chaos made it impossible to see the floor itself. From among the rubble, a man looked up in surprise, clearly caught off guard. "Who are you?" the man asked, squinting at Hyrcanus. "I don't recall making an appointment." It was Ahimbri himself. Hyrcanus handed over Khotan's letter, introduced himself, and explained that he had come on behalf of the old man. Ahimbri scanned the letter, noted that Hyrcanus was a novice dark mage, and gave a small nod of approval. For someone so young, he concluded Hyrcanus already demonstrated remarkable skill. Then, Ahimbri presented the reward. Hyrcanus received the skill book, bone armor and the helmet of madness. He felt a thrill run through him. The acquisition of 2 extremely rare skills at once was beyond his expectations. He thanked Ahimbri profusely, unable to hide his excitement. But Ahimbri's expression remained serious. "The conversation is over," he said firmly, gesturing toward the door. "You may leave now." The system immediately confirmed the quest's completion. Ahimbri's teaching completed. A warning also appeared. "Be careful on the way back." Hyrcanus paused, frowning. Something about the warning felt strange. He called out to Ahimbri, asking him to wait, but the NPC had already turned away. The hero couldn't help but wonder why the quest had ended so abruptly. and why he felt that this was only the beginning. Ahimbri was clearly planning to give him another task. It was obvious he hadn't come just for a couple of skill books. In desperation, Hyrcanus called out loudly, declaring that he was ready to do anything. The NPC approached, grabbed his hand, and asked if he was truly willing to fulfill any condition. When Hyrcanus nodded, Ahimbri's grin turned almost maniacal. As a result, the hero received a new quest, Egg from the Nest. The task required him to retrieve an egg from a nest, but shockingly, there was no reward. Hyrcanus froze, feeling as though he had been tricked. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, a lone knight strode through the streets. Passers-by instinctively flinched, clearly intimidated by the knight's imposing gear, guessing that his equipment must be extremely expensive. The knight continued toward the Raiders Association branch, clearly seeking the mask of Ha-Ho. Hyrcanus, still reeling from Ahimbri's cryptic quest, began to suspect that some NPCs might be deceiving players. He had expected a main storyline mission, but instead, he faced a mysterious task with no apparent reward. Irritated, he wondered whether it was even worth pursuing. Suddenly, a strange man appeared before him, inquiring about the details of his quest. Within moments, several players gathered around, all trying to pry into Hyrcanus' task. Panic surged, he had completely forgotten about them. For a moment, he considered eliminating everyone. But before he could act, a knight suddenly appeared. Releasing a wave of energy, the knight scattered the crowd and sank down in front of Hyrcanus, who was now lying on the floor. The knight requested a private conversation. Hyrcanus, wary, initially ordered him to step back, but the knight calmly approached and addressed him quietly, calling him Canis, the Mask of Ha-Ho, and asking for his cooperation. Hyrcanus froze, he had never heard anyone use that name. They retreated to a quiet city alley. The knight apologized for the inconvenience, tapping his watch and explaining that a normal conversation outside was impossible. Then he revealed his true form. A man wearing glasses, his equipment marking him as at least a ranked player. Hyrcanus didn't recognize him. "Are you really the Mask of Ha-Ho?" the knight asked. Hyrcanus, uneasy, decided to play ignorant. "Mask of Ha-Ho? I'm just here for a chat," he said, all the while trying to gauge who this man really was. The knight, a little irritated, pressed further. "Did you recently receive a quest from an NPC named Ahimbri?" Hyrcanus feigned ignorance, demanding to know who the man was and why he should share information. He kept up the act, curious to see how the stranger would respond. After a tense moment, the knight extended his hand. "I apologize. I was wrong." Hyrcanus exhaled with relief, shaking the offered hand. "Everything's fine," he said, turning to leave. This, he decided, would be the only time he would forgive the knight. The stranger watched silently as he walked away. From the shadows, another player whispered to his comrade, doubting that Hyrcanus was truly who they were looking for. The knight noted one thing. This hero was clearly inexperienced. Anyone who had played Warlord long enough wouldn't so carelessly display their wristwatch. Meanwhile, the second player suggested continuing surveillance of the Ahimbri NPC, since the infected count quest was nearly complete. The knight explained that Hyrcanus' mission was part of the main story, so unnecessary risks were out of the question. The magician agreed and returned to his post. Hyrcanus, observing from a window, quickly realized there were two coordinated players at work. He concluded they must belong to some organization, since ordinary guilds would have introduced themselves by now. Clearly, these were unusual players not to be underestimated. The next day, Hyrcanus still pondered the encounter, suspecting that the quest held hidden layers. He assumed these players had seen his video and already knew the Mask of Ha-Ho would receive the task. That explained why they had let him go so easily. Continuing the quest would almost certainly bring him face to face with them again. To avoid further complications, he decided to temporarily stop publishing videos. Of course, Hyrcanus had bigger problems, Chelsea. Meanwhile, she had just logged out of the game. Her secretary, Penny, entered the room, praising her for her work and handing her a bottle of water. Chelsea asked about the guild entry exam. She scoffed, calling all the candidates complete trash, and asked if there was any news regarding the Mask of Ha-Ho. Penny hesitated, then reported that he appeared to have joined another guild, as he hadn't responded yet. Chelsea's face darkened with fury, demanding verification of this information. Penny promised to check again, reassuring her he would not return until he had accurate results. While changing her clothes, Chelsea asked about the chairman's statement. Penny replied that there was no word yet. Chelsea smiled, interpreting the silence as a sign that Warlord was progressing well. Fully dressed, she recalled that the hero had tried to force a marriage in-game, an audacious move, and immediately ordered a new batch of candidates to be recruited, demanding a report by the following morning. Penny was surprised by the urgency, but Chelsea ignored him, walking out with her usual commanding presence. Meanwhile, in the dungeon, Hyrcanus realized it had been a long time since he had come to this swamp. This area, infested with high-level lizards, seemed perfect for the Ahimbri quest involving the egg. He concluded the egg could belong to a bird, reptile, or insect, and logically deduced that the swamp was the only viable location at his level. Calling one of his subordinates, he prepared for battle. The monsters here were powerful, and Hyrcanus knew he needed a boost. Drawing a mark and casting a spell, he activated his Helmet of Madness. His subordinate began to transform, bloodlust filling its eyes and a terrifying aura spreading across the swamp. Hyrcanus watched with excitement as his creature morphed into something extraordinary. To test its power, he ordered it to attack, but forgot a key detail. The skill carried a chance of sanity loss. The creature lunged at its master, eyes blazing with bloodlust. Surprised and frightened, Hyrcanus struck the creature's skull with a powerful blow, sending it flying into the air. When it landed with a thud, he demanded an explanation. How had it dared to attack him? Hyrcanus double-checked the skill's notes. There was no bug. Perhaps the skill hadn't activated properly. Before he could ponder further, a level 30 lizard emerged from the swamp, ready to attack. Just in time, he realized the real test had begun. He activated the skill again, and the system confirmed that the Helmet of Madness had increased the subordinate's attributes. Equipping bone armor on the skeleton, for now just the chest plate, he prepared all his summons for battle. The lizards, sensing resistance, hesitated. Hyrcanus ordered his minions to strike. They attacked in coordinated succession, forcing the lizards onto the defensive. One lizard tried to flank, but the skeleton intercepted it, delivering a crushing blow. The system confirmed the kill. 3 lizards defeated, 864 experience points earned, and Hyrcanus leveled up twice. Hyrcanus laughed heartily, watching his subordinates in action, delighted by their effectiveness and the thrill of battle. Hyrcanus informed his skeletons that they would spend the next week hunting monsters while simultaneously searching for the elusive egg. As he praised his loyal minions, a figure watched him from a distance. A woman, her gaze sharp and predatory. Her name was Ilya. She believed her beauty was undeniable, something everyone recognized. She didn't need to boast, it was obvious to all. Life had always come easily to her. Troubles were quickly solved by her servants, victories achieved without effort. But today, luck seemed to mock her. As she took a step forward, she slipped in the mud and fell face first into a puddle. Disgust and frustration surged through her. She wanted nothing more than to escape this miserable place. Her irritation only grew as she remembered why she had been brought here. One of her servants had promised to help her level up, but the fool had died, leaving her stranded alone. Watching Hyrcanus from afar, Ilya's eyes glimmered with cunning. The hero seemed strong but solitary, a potential slave she could bend to her will. She decided to act. Suddenly, a carefully staged cry for help escaped her lips. Stumbling dramatically, she fell to the ground, clutching her legs and groaning in apparent pain. "Help me! The monsters! My legs!" she cried, feigning weakness. In her mind, she thought this would surely compel the oblivious hero to come to her aid. Hyrcanus, however, remained completely unbothered. He didn't slow his pace, didn't glance back. The woman's eyes widened in shock. How could he ignore her? Rage simmered in Ilya as she bit her lips, stunned that her carefully crafted plan had failed. Meanwhile, Hyrcanus continued on, dispatching several monsters along the way with ease. His skeletons handled most of the work, leaving him momentarily bored. Through the corner of his eye, he noticed the woman still following him, stubbornly keeping pace. He thought of his past, the traitorous friends who had tried to deceive him, and anger flared. If people were going to exist in this world, he reasoned, they should at least play fairly. Finally, deciding enough was enough, Hyrcanus stopped, turned, and addressed her directly. His voice was calm but carried an unmistakable edge of authority. "What do you want?" Ilya froze, caught off guard by the sudden confrontation. For the first time, the confident predator felt a twinge of fear. Ilya claimed that she had dropped her sword in the swamp and begged Hyrcanus for help retrieving it. He simply replied that it would be better for her to disappear from his sight once it was found. Delighted, the woman thanked him profusely, assuring him she would never forget his help. But deep down, Ilya smirked to herself, convinced she had once again duped another fool. After a trek through the swamp, they located the sword. Ilya again showered Hyrcanus with gratitude. He waved it off, reminding her of his promise to vanish once the task was done. Taking a deep breath, he commanded his subordinates to retrieve the sword, and they did so immediately. Ilya laughed at the display, still convinced that necromancers were nothing without their minions. Seizing the moment while Hyrcanus' attention was elsewhere, she attempted to strike him. But before she could succeed, Hyrcanus turned swiftly, noting, "You're far too slow." Ilya froze, confused, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Hyrcanus then grabbed her by the clothes and swung her high into the air, sending her crashing into the swamp. She emerged from the water, sputtering curses, furious. "You really think you can get away with this?" she demanded. "My fans will find you and tear you apart." Hyrcanus laughed. "Look behind you." Confused, Ilya turned and froze. Several lizards, alerted by his command, advanced on her. She flailed in a futile attempt to defend herself, while Hyrcanus calmly noted that she had never stood a chance. "I saw your intentions from the start," he muttered. Having been deceived too many times himself, he refused to be fooled again. He turned to his skeletons, but his irritation flared when he noticed them mimicking the flirtatious gestures they had observed in Ilya. "Stop copying her," he snapped, "or I'll destroy you entirely." At that moment, a system message appeared. "Player Ilya has been eliminated." Hyrcanus remembered her boasts of bodyguards and concluded they had never existed. Someone like her simply couldn't command them. Meanwhile, a group of her fans, monitoring her canis through a recording device, fumed in frustration. Later, still in the swamp, another player, injured, appeared before him. Hyrcanus, observing the sword in the boy's shoulder, listened as the player explained that he had come to fight the enemy of Lady Ilya. Curious, Hyrcanus asked why the player went to such lengths. The boy smiled ominously, declaring it was out of love for Ilya. Without hesitation, Hyrcanus cut him down, shaking his head at the absurdity. Everything seemed like a cruel joke, a reminder of how often he encountered lunatics like her. Turning away, he considered whether to hunt Ilya down himself, but decided against it to avoid further complications. A system notification informed him of a reward. Another watch, not his, 5,000 gold coins, leather boots, and a promise necklace. He immediately recognized the necklace as potentially super rare, worth up to 800,000 units. "Love is wonderful," he muttered with satisfaction, imagining the luxurious dinner it would afford him. Suddenly, a voice called from the forest. Hyrcanus turned, expecting one of Ilya's fans, but found himself confronted by several warriors. He began to retreat, surprised by their numbers. Counting quickly, he realized so many were obsessed over a single woman. He increased his pace, calling his skeletons for support. One of the players, noticing the summoned warriors, unleashed the power of love skill, cutting down the skeletons effortlessly. Hyrcanus realized these opponents were far above his level and too numerous for direct confrontation. He increased his movement speed and escaped, vowing that once he gained levels, he would find them and exact revenge. After a grueling sprint, he paused to catch his breath. The low-level chase made evading them difficult, but he knew he just needed to survive for now. Glancing around, he realized the swamp had changed. Its blackened waters and twisted trees unlike anything he had seen before. He suspected his guess was correct. He had reached a new, dangerous zone. Meanwhile, the pursuing players scanned the area for Hyrcanus. "He must be ahead," one shouted, noticing a skeleton. Sure enough, the hero's minions danced ahead, oblivious to the humans observing them. The players were stunned. One, enraged, cursed Hyrcanus for daring to insult Lady Ilia and rushed toward the skeletons. But at that instant, a massive creature emerged from the swamp. Without hesitation, it seized the player in its jaws. The friends stared in horror. A level 40 dragon lizard, the boss of the swamp, had appeared. Hyrcanus hid and watched. He hadn't expected the nest to be a dragon lizard's lair. This boss, with immense defense, HP, and attack, required a group of 20 level 40 players to defeat. Rumors suggested the raid had already been completed, but now, due to the egg from the nest quest, the monster had respawned. Hyrcanus realized this must be where Ahimbri's quest led. A wave of irritation hit him. The NPC was clearly a trickster. Yet he also felt relief. With the boss engaged by the other players, he had an opportunity to act. One of Ilia's fans shouted that the dragon lizard was too strong and suggested retreat. Hyrcanus appeared, unfazed. "Retreat is not an option," he said. Summoning his skeletons with the skeleton fragment skill, he prepared to take advantage of the distraction. Observing his minions surround the players, one shouted that they only needed to break through. Then the lizard struck, sending him flying. Using the chaos, Hyrcanus sprinted to the nest. Landing in the nest, he scanned for the egg. His excitement turned to confusion. He hadn't found it immediately. After searching frantically, he spotted it. Not an egg, but a stone sealed with a strange purple mark. Suspicious, he prepared to take it anyway. Suddenly, a system notification informed him that his skeleton warrior had been destroyed. The dragon lizard, alerted to the intruder, was returning. Hyrcanus realized that with the boss back, he was in grave danger. But he could not leave without claiming the object. Resolute, he decided to proceed, taking the stone despite its unusual appearance. Ahimbri, meanwhile, observed the task's execution closely, monitoring every move. Returning to the site where the players had faced the boss, Hyrcanus saw their bodies scattered across the swamp, a grim testament to the dragon lizard's power. He approached one of the fallen players, laughing quietly to himself. Taking the player's watch, he muttered, "Warlord really is something. There are so many crazy people around because everyone has too much freedom." The player, still conscious but furious, cursed at him. Hyrcanus pressed his sword lightly against the man's face. The threat silenced him instantly. Leaning close, Hyrcanus spoke deliberately. "Listen carefully. Until now, I've been playing for fun. But now, I have much more at stake in this game. Next time, you won't get off so easily. That warning applies to you, and to her." With that, he turned and sprinted at full speed, using the bodies of Ilia's fans as stepping stones to navigate through the swamp. As he ran, he considered that if these players continued to interfere, a real war could erupt, one he intended to avoid for now. Deciding to make the situation work in his favor, Hyrcanus chose to turn the swamp into a source of profit. He planned to post a message on the game forum, revealing that a dragon had appeared in the swamp and offering to sell the exact location for 100,000 gold. After his brief detour, he returned to Ahimbri. Placing the object he had retrieved, which he believed to be the egg, on the table, he awkwardly announced, "I've brought what was requested." He hoped it was indeed the right item. The thought of searching the entire map for that elusive egg again was unbearable. Ahimbri examined the object carefully. Hyrcan felt a twinge of nervousness, unsure whether he had made the right choice. Moments later, the NPC smiled and nodded. "This is exactly what I was looking for," he said. Relief washed over Hyrcanus. He had finally completed the task correctly. Ahimbri added that Hyrcanus had acted faster than expected. He had assumed it would take someone like him much longer to retrieve the object. Hyrcanus blinked in surprise at the NPC's assessment, then straightened and said, "I did what I could. Does this entitle me to a new task?" Ahimbri leaned back and studied him carefully. "Do you know what this object is?" Hyrcanus shook his head. "The explorers of the mutant region discovered this," Ahimbri explained. "It is called the Stone of Infection." Hyrcanus froze. Recognition and shock ran through him. This was why those players had been hunting him so relentlessly. The Stone of Infection wasn't just a rare item. It was a key artifact tied to the main storyline. He realized that all along, the other players had been trying to ensure that no one else could acquire an item that could affect the progress of the central quest. For a moment, he felt a mix of frustration and relief. He had assumed the quest was some meaningless detour, a trick by the NPC. But in reality, it was connected to the core of the game's main story. Ahimbri gave a small, almost apologetic smile. "I know this task was difficult for someone at your level. My thanks for completing it." Hyrcanus exhaled slowly, still processing everything. The main quest had just revealed itself in ways he had never anticipated. And now the real game was about to begin. And that's where our video ends. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and leave a comment down below. And of course, if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you're updated on our next content. Until the next video.